Have you ever thought about leaving everything behind and moving to a totally new state? I know I have, and as an adult, I've actually lived in 3 different states. Each and every time I moved, I always asked the same question: how much does it cost to live there? This article came out recently and provides us with some data that we can use to figure out the 10 cheapest states to live in, how much it costs to live in all 50 states, and I'll give you more information from my experience on what you'll want to consider before quitting your job, packing up your whole life in the back of a truck, and heading for the stay line. Let's get into it. So the article was posted to CNBC.com at the end of August of 2023 and was written by Mike Winters. But the primary source of the data comes from an article from GoBankingRates.com and data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. According to the article, the 50-30-20 budget was used, which means 50% of after-tax income goes to necessities and basic needs, 30% goes towards discretionary spending, and 20% goes to savings and investing. So if we know how much it will cost to live in the state overall, using the budget, we can figure out how much we need to make to afford to live, enjoy life, and plan for the future. For a single person living within the budget in the state of Hawaii, it's going to run you $112,411 a year. That is crazy expensive, especially considering that the average single American makes $57,200 a year. And since that's the average, that number is most likely skewed higher than what most people actually make, since the top 1% of wealthy individuals in America control almost 1/3 of the money, and the top 10% control almost 72%. The good news is that this is the most expensive state to live in, so that this is the upper end of how much money it would take to live, according to the data. And that's largely due to 2 main reasons. Hawaii is a collection of islands, and the main way people get things on the island is to ship them in by sea, which is much more expensive than freight trucks on highways or trains. In addition, people need space to live, and Hawaii has a limited amount of space, which drives up housing prices. Massachusetts, California, and New York also have high housing costs, which make them the next 3 most expensive states to live in. But an interesting finding is that Alaska is also very far away and has limited space for housing, but it ranked as the 5th most expensive state to live in, which probably suggests that homes in Massachusetts, California, and New York are far beyond affordable for most people. There is hope though, because over half of all the states are still affordable if you're single and making the average income. The article lists the states alphabetically, so I reorganized them from most expensive to least expensive. If you appreciate me doing that for you, let me know by clicking the like button down below. From the list, it seems that the average single individual making $57,200 is going to have a tough time living in Hawaii, Massachusetts, California, New York, Alaska, Maryland, Vermont, Oregon, Washington, New Jersey, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Arizona, Rhode Island, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, and Virginia. So there's a good chance there's no Pokemon card money in the budget if you live in one of these states. Shout out to my wife who got me this awesome Mew from the new card set. I did not know that for less than $15 you could release this much dopamine. A little extra disposable income every month might make you want to consider moving to states like Montana, Florida, Delaware, Utah, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Carolina, South Dakota, Minnesota, New Mexico, Texas, Ohio, Louisiana, Michigan, Indiana, Wyoming, Illinois, Georgia, and Nebraska. And you'll have the best income to cost of living ratio in the 10 cheapest states to live in, being Tennessee, Iowa, Missouri, West Virginia, Kansas, Kentucky, Arkansas, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. From the data, generally speaking, it seems like the lower half of the eastern side of the country seems to be offering the best income to cost of living ratio. However, as useful as the data is, how expensive it is to live is also highly dependent on our own personal situation. Living with a roommate or having a spouse that brings in an income can drastically alter the income to cost of living ratio. The larger point being is that where you choose to live does make a difference in the cost of living, but how you choose to live is also a huge factor. For example, Mississippi is considered the cheapest state to live in, but you could easily find very expensive homes for sale despite it being the most affordable state to live in. And having a large car payment or high interest credit card debt is going to factor into the cost of living as well as about a million other different things for you and your family. But you could always offset a lot of the cost of living by converting an old school bus or shipping container into a home, and maybe even do do it a few more times and sell the ones you don't need. The fact that someone out there might actually be doing this is a clear sign we live in weird times. And if you have any information on that, let me know in the comment section down below. And of course, taxes are one of the biggest expenses an individual will have. As of 2023, Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming have no state income tax, which might make them more attractive to some people. But this is going to be dependent on how you get your money, because Washington has a higher capital gains tax, so be advised. And speaking of being advised, remember that I'm not a financial expert of any kind, and you should absolutely speak with a professional when it comes to your finances and investments. And it might benefit you to know that California, Hawaii, and New Jersey have some of the highest personal tax rates in the country, with Oregon, Minnesota, the District of Columbia, New York, Vermont, Iowa, and Wisconsin right behind them. So this is definitely something to consider for high-income individuals. We also need to keep in mind that moving to a new place involves costs to actually getting there, and not to mention the type of work you might find in the new area might not pay as much compared to somewhere else if those jobs are even available. If you work for a company that has offices in Alabama and San Francisco, you might find out that the San Francisco team is getting paid more than the Alabama team for the same amount of work. This could be upsetting, but the company might have decided to increase the pay to help offset the cost of living, given that it's so much more expensive to live in San Fran than Alabama. So in reality, technically everyone is getting paid roughly about the same. That's assuming that those jobs are even available in those two regions, because in some cases, the environment dictates the kind of work being offered. Silicon Valley is probably more geared towards a tech professional, and Manhattan, New York might be a better option for people in finance, just like Florida is probably in high demand for people who can fix and repair boats compared to a landlocked state like New Mexico. And if your friends and loved ones are out of the state and you have to travel back and forth to see them, one round-trip flight and hotel stay for the holidays could negate all your savings you made if you decided to move. And don't forget about buying food when you travel and gifts as well. This scenario could get really extreme if you're one of the many Americans that decided to move out of the country to Spain, but chances are you're more worried about the cost of housing and the taxes that come with that than a flight overseas. And of course, making sure your travel visas and passports are still valid. And there's obviously a huge difference between living right in the heart of a major US city versus the suburbs and more rural areas. For me personally, there always had to be some good reason for me to leave where I was, and it had to be within budget, and generally it had to make sense long term. A while back, I had to decide between Chicago and Philadelphia when I got accepted into dental school, and ultimately I chose Philadelphia because it was generally cheaper to live, the school I was attending was slightly less expensive, the winters weren't as extreme, and I had family in the area. My family also used to live there, so I was raised in an Eagles household, so that was a nice bonus. While I was there, I was living like a student, so my main activities were not enjoying the city of Philadelphia, but rather studying and treating patients. The reality is that people at all income levels live in each state and city across America, and we have to ultimately decide what we're willing to go without if we don't make enough for all of life's luxuries. And for me, that meant very basic meals, using public transportation, a lot of walking when it wasn't available, and not going to an Eagles game despite being in the city for the year they won the Super Bowl. When I moved to South Carolina after dental school, I chose that state specifically. I could have gone to Florida or Texas or somewhere else, but I chose South Carolina because it had decent weather, had a relatively low cost of living, and I found a job that was close to where my wife was while she finished her schooling. So we were still in a long distance relationship, but we got to see each other almost every weekend as opposed to once a month if we were lucky, which was a nice change. In addition, it was relatively straightforward getting a dental license for that state with the board exam I had already passed, and living there allowed me to practice for and take another dental board exam so I could eventually get a license to practice in Georgia, which is where most of our friends and family were and where we ended up today. So sometimes, at least in my case, and probably yours as well, it's not just about the numbers, which explains why we're not all moving to Mississippi. If you're having trouble making ends meet, I can't guarantee you anything except that time will continue to move forward. I think everyone these days needs a side hustle to bring in some more income, and I made this video on the ones that I think are actually worth spending the time and going all in on. Check out those here. And if you've decided to move recently or are thinking about it, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to click the like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more content. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.